Brian, what a big fat show we have, even though you're sipping margaritas in Palm Springs. I'm sorry, but there's too much going on this week. Consumer Reports thinks hydrogen fuel cell cars are going to be a thing. Apparently, the staff there only reads Consumer Reports because, my God, Sweden has a complaints board for improper home heat pump installations. Many of you weren't born when it was formed. It's unbelievable. You think of it as new technology. Nope. Battery prices from one popular type of lithium battery for the world's largest battery manufacturer dropped substantially this year. You won't believe where the prices are going by the middle of this year. I mean, literally, Brian, you won't believe it. I'm not even kidding. Toyota thinks EVs will max out at 30%. Have they got insane? China has already got beyond 30%. Are they living in a bubble? In a chamber? I don't understand. Coal mines in England are going to be mapped out for renewable energy, and a bunch more on the show. Don't miss it.
Yeah, so I'm here in beautiful Palm Springs. It's fantastic. I've never taken a hot vacation before. This is something that a lot of people in Canada do every winter because the winters are so god-awful. And now that I'm retired, I'm finally getting to it. And here in Palm Springs, I've never been here before. It's beautiful and sunny. It's, 25 Celsius, and it's great.
Have you been to the Walmart yet? Best Walmart I've ever seen was in Palm Springs.
Really?
It was very nice. There was, honestly, my whole family remarked on it. It didn't have solar panels on it, though. I haven't
been there. We went to, what do you call it? The big, the big national park.
Oh, Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
And how much time did you spend there? A day?
Yeah, more like half a day probably. Yeah, it was great. We rented a Tesla Model Y from Hertz, so we can drive electric the whole time that we're here. And yeah, Joshua Tree is spectacular and amazing. That was a lot of fun. Took a lot of pictures. And it was just fun in an EV because it's sort of hilly landscape. And there was a whole section driving through, like about 20 minutes when we were driving. And the car battery just went from 68% down to 67. And then we got regen back up to 68. Then down for 20 minutes, it 3 times it went back and forth from 68% to 67. It was like I had discovered perpetual motion or something. It was a lot of fun.
How do you like the Y? This is your first time living with the Y. I'm curious because you've got an S and a 3.
Yeah, and those are both very low cars. So the advantage of the Y, it's a little taller, so it's easier to get into with my aging knees. So that's why a lot of people like that kind of form factor. They're not quite so low to the ground. So yeah, there might be a Y in our future. The 3 is about 4 years old now. So we may move to a Y.
That's exciting. They've come down in price, haven't they? I know they have in the States. Have they in Canada as well, where you live?
Yeah, I haven't quite checked into it yet, but that's something we're probably going to do. And of course, there's a huge wind farm around here, not very far from Palm Springs itself. Did you see that when you were down here?
I've seen, it's hard to say. I've seen solar farms and wind farms. I didn't think of it as huge, though, so probably not.
So you spent all your time at Walmart then?
I didn't know. We went to Joshua Tree. We looked around. We did different things. And believe me, we stopped at these places and took pictures because I was so, it was so new to me being from a place that rejects that stuff. I was, it was practically an ecotourism thing for me when I went down there.
Yeah, well, it's an area known for its wind, right? Like there's sort of a valley here between the mountains and the wind can really whip up. So perfect place for a wind farm. And there was some older ones in there that I assume there were older ones that only had 2 blades on them. Most wind turbines have 3 blades, but there was some with only 2 and they looked like they were probably older ones. So that, maybe the initial installation. So not the best technology, but still cranking out power, many years later, which is great.
So I've got this picture on my living room wall that I took of my daughter at Joshua Tree up on the lookout. I forget what the lookout's called. It's just one of those things we had, part of a day there as well. And so we didn't do any hiking, but we stayed on the road and looked at things that we could drive to and just get out. Rushed, unfortunately. I hate rushing things, but we went up there and it's quite beautiful. It's overlooking, I think it's looking in a southwest direction. And the plaque there says that you may notice pollution and all the pollution from LA blows inward through that, I don't know what you would call it, a channel in the mountains or some sort of breakthrough there. It's the right terms are eluding me right now, but yeah, and it's a regular thing to have the pollution from Los Angeles there. And I'm going to go back there one day, Brian, and there's not going to be that pollution. That's how optimistic I am about things. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and perhaps I'm just lucky, but certainly not seeing any pollution seems great. The air is nice and clean. And of course, spent a few days in Vancouver before we came down here. Got to see a Vancouver Canucks hockey game, which is, I'm a big Vancouver Canucks fan, and they're the hottest team in the NHL right now. When I bought the tickets, they weren't, but they've been on this incredible winning streak. So it was fun to see the Canucks on their big winning streak.
Who did they play?
They played Chicago. I got the tickets hoping to see Connor Bedard, who is the hot young player for Chicago, who used to play for our team in Regina, the Regina Pats. And he got injured about 2 weeks ago, broke his jaw. So
yeah,
no Connor Bedard, but it was still a great game.
So you're loving your trip. You're liking it. Where would you go that's warm? What are you thinking now? Like now that you've done it, what do you think about future plans and what you might
that's a good question. Like, Palm Springs is good because it's not that far away. Like the flight isn't that bad. And, in January, the weather seems perfect. So, I don't know. We might come back, but I don't want to go too far for these kind of hot vacations, but I don't know. We'll see.
When I went there, I didn't understand what the fuss was about. I really like Joshua Tree National Park. Like, I love all national parks, and we hit about 5 of them in California. And they stay with me, forever. And I follow them on Twitter, those parks, and I see what's going on there. And I just love them, and they make a big impact on me. But I didn't understand what the value of Palm Springs was. Like, it just seemed like it was summer when we went. It was very hot. It was 50 degrees and 122 Fahrenheit in Death Valley when we went there. So it was very hot. So everyone, I'm assuming, was indoors, even at the Walmart. So, but yeah, I just didn't see it. I saw resorts and golf courses. Is that the thing about Palm Springs?
Well, no, part of it for me is the architecture. Palm Springs is known for its mid-century modern architecture. So a couple of days ago, we took the tour where you get on a bus and you drive around and you look at the mid-century modern buildings and stuff. And that was fantastic. So yeah, it's weird. There's basically 2 architectural styles here, like sort of Spanish revival and mid-century modern. Like that's it. Every building is either one of those 2 things. I'm not sure I've ever been to a place that was like that. It probably developed naturally, but then at a certain point, I assume they created bylaws to keep it that way. But, Spanish, colonial or mid-century modern, those are your choices.
Have you bumped into any celebrities other than yourself out there? Anybody?
No celebrities, but Leonardo DiCaprio's house was on the tour.
Oh, it was, eh?
Yeah.
Brian, when we exited the boundaries of Joshua Tree and headed northwest to get to our next hotel, which was, I don't know, I forget where it was, but it was one of the interior California cities. That area where Kate's lazy trailer park is from the B-52s, that just in that general area, I think there's a town called Joshua Tree. I, for the first time in my life, felt like I could live there, live in a place. Like I could have a desert home and live there. Maybe not all year, but I felt like I could live there. There was something just magical and accepting. Of course, everybody's a flaky artist and UFO believer there. We're artists, but not flaky artists.
No.
I don't know. But there was something about it that just said, this is for you. Of course, I felt that way in certain parts of Vancouver when I finally went there last year. Mostly the $10 million parts, but not so much the $500,000 parts. But yeah, that's not going to happen. This week, Brian, John Kerry, I think he was at the Davos summit, and he was leaving, and he's no longer going to be the U.S. envoy for climate change. And on his way out, he was asked about EVs, and he was kind of perturbed. and saying that there's a bit of misinformation that's slowing down EVs.
Very clear policy, which regrettably has been attacked by people who are engaged in high levels of disinformation. They've been trying to scare people about the range of vehicles, so there's range anxiety out there. But in addition to that, you've had some pullback because communities aren't moving fast enough to give permitting to deploy some of the renewables that we need.
So it seemed weird that, one of the big people in climate was blaming misinformation. So I thought that was worth mentioning on the show. I don't know how much it is affecting sales. When you look at the numbers, actually, well, I think we'll talk about them later on the show if we have time. They are quite high last year. So there's an S-curve for EV adoption, even in the United States, and it's going up high. Consumer Reports podcast, I was listening to them. They were answering some questions on what do you think the fuel for the cars will be in 10 years. And these are people who constantly are testing EVs and finally sort of felt like they got to know about them, like they were really ignorant about them. This is all these people do is test cars. You should know what an EV is. And you know what they thought? They thought that hydrogen, they thought about it for a while. Hydrogen was going to be the fuel source. Man, they have no freaking idea. None. The Alberta tar sands pollution is 64 times worse than reported, according to headlines this week. I'm shocked. Lying by only a factor of 64, Brian. I thought it would be worse. Seems light for the oil industry in Alberta. 64 times worse. So they're saying how clean the oil sands are, which of course they're tar that you have to boil, get the oil out of, and dig holes in the ground and pollute rivers. It's crap. A little correction. I said in the previous show that the highest update in heat pumps on the U.S., uptake of the heat pumps in the United States was in the Northeast. It's actually in the Southeast, where it's not quite as cold. The Southeast has a lot of oil-burning furnaces that are being replaced by heat pumps. Also, speaking of misinformation or disinformation, I guess wrong information, Marketplace, a trusted source of consumer reporting in Canada on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, did a piece on electric vehicles, and I couldn't watch it more than a minute and 20 seconds. It was so bad. It just seems so negative that, they found somebody with a lemon. Well, how hard is it to find somebody with a combustion engine? I mean, if you could find 100 of them, all you have to do is put out a tweet. If you're them, you'd find 100 people with lemons in the combustion world. So that's not fair.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is when you look at electric cars like that, it's like, well, naturally, it's a Consumer Reports show. They're going to look at the pros and the cons. And yeah, there's pros and cons. But anytime anybody covers a gas car, they don't look at it that same way. Like, if you're doing a review of the new Corvette, do you talk about the fact that the fuel could explode at any time? No, you don't, because that's an accepted fact. We've been living with gas cars for 100 years, so that you can spill gas on your shoes at the gas station.
That's not good for your shoes.
Yeah. But yet when they're talking about electric cars, they'll talk about all the problems in connecting up, there's pros and cons to both, but the reporting is never the same for gas cars because we've just been living with them so long.
Well, I asked on Facebook, the local Facebook EV group, what people thought of it. I had one interesting answer. Some people pointed out that they went on this journey in a Tesla and the Tesla told them to reduce their speed. Well, they were using almost the entire battery to get to that destination. It was in Ontario, Canada. And meanwhile, they're passing 5 chargers, 5 Tesla chargers. But no, they had to do it and that. And then, people think that you have to lower your speed now because they're no good at... Well, you wouldn't do that in a gas car. You wouldn't push the limit of your gas car, and you would fill up before you got to 4% remaining in your tank or 3% or whatever, because you would have a headwind, and it's happened to me. They said that there was 4 Teslas waiting to charge, which is unusual but it does happen in certain places and certain times.
Yeah.
But then how many times have I gone to Costco and seen 50 people trying to save 5 cents on their gas, in line, and people will go to great lengths, especially when gas prices are high and you're driving pickup trucks and large SUVs, you want to save that 5 cents. The Tesla navigation will tell you to stop for 15 to 20. Okay, this is comments from David from our Facebook group. He said that he pointed out that gas cars at Costco, like I said, the Tesla nav will tell you where to stop for a 15 to 20 minute top up to get to Ottawa. There should be no range anxiety, and there's not. Have you suffered range anxiety lately?
No. And of course, the Tesla navigation is renowned for being really good at that, for planning your route and telling you where to stop. But it still could be better. Like, I always sort of double check things to, because it'll tell you, like on our trip to Minnesota, it'll say, oh, you should stop at here. And I think to myself, well, I think there's probably a stop before then that I might like to stop at, but it doesn't automatically put that into the navigation. So then, there was a couple of charging stops I sort of had to put in manually. So, it's not perfect, but it sort of goes in line with that thing of, all these problems are accepted with gasoline cars because we've been living with them for 100 years. But, it's just that slightly, it's not harder planning. It's just different planning for the EV.
So you got your Model Y rented just by using your Tesla app, right? I mean, you clicked on, how did that work?
Well, no. Well, we booked it through the website, and yeah, that is a fun feature where you get in the car and they give you the Tesla key card, which you use to unlock it, and then a little QR code comes up on the screen, and then you look at that with your phone on your camera phone, and then it loads your profile into the car. So
your seating position and the way you like things, that's pretty sweet to rent a car that way. I mean,
it's really great.
That would be nice.
It's the future. Of
course, you have to own a Tesla before that can happen. Another point that David pointed out was that they were using a Nissan Leaf with an obsolete CHAdeMO DC charging as a test for DC fast charging. That's like, I don't. The Leaf and the CHAdeMO is like so obsolete. I don't know what to compare it to, like an iPhone 1 or something. Not even. I mean, a flip phone, one of the first flip phones, essentially. That's not fair. And they said they were using a CHAdeMO adapter for the Tesla. Come on, I didn't even know those existed. I mean, it's so complicated for everybody to grasp all this unless you're an EV driver. And the journalists, chances are they won't, but they will be one day. And you know what? This is going to flip. But right now, there's people getting scared off of this sort of thing. Brian, Canada, this is hot off the press. As we speak, they are having a press conference saying that they're going to refurbish a 50-year-old nuclear reactor in Pickering, Ontario, to let it work for another 30 years. And 15 minutes before the press conference, I got an email from a publicity company representing Dr. Chris Kiefer, president of the Canadians for Nuclear Energy, wants to be on our show. We don't do interviews, and I don't know how I would have a conversation with them about nuclear because I don't think it's going to work, and I'll explain why later in the show.
Yeah, although the idea of extending the life of existing nuclear plants,
it's still billions and billions of dollars. I mean, with the technology we have today, at the prices we have today, it makes sense, but you're not looking towards the future. You're not looking even till mid this year where prices will drop. It's crazy. Let's get on with the show.
All right. So from The Guardian, coal mines are going to be adapted. These are abandoned coal mines for energy potential. So we talk a lot about heat pumps on the show, and I have an air source heat pump in my house, which still works in frigid temperatures down to minus 22 Celsius. And it basically just harvests whatever heat there is in the air, and there's still heat in the air, even if it's minus 22, and then compresses that with a compressor, turns it into usable heat, and then sends it around your house. But a more efficient way to do this often is going into the ground, and you can do that with geothermal and just digging pipes deep into the ground. Or you can use existing infrastructure. And I know we talked about one time there was a hospital that was looking to harvest waste heat from the sewer system near the hospital. So the idea being is that there's already existing underground infrastructure that can be warmer or maybe not as far down as kind of other heat sources. And you do the same thing. You harvest that heat, then you use a compressor to compress it. That makes it hotter and turns
That's very interesting, because we where it gets really cold where we live, like minus 40 and even below sometimes, or occasionally, but you have to build the infrastructure for that extreme. All of our pipes and sewers are at least 4 feet, because that's where the frost line is. So that means it's above freezing down there, and freezing is an okay temperature for a heat pump, right? I mean, if you just ran down into the sewer lines and where that infrastructure is, that's more than enough heat. If yours goes down to minus 22, then 0 should be fine.
Yeah, and really, that's what we should be doing. Like the air source heat pump on my house, it works, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. But it's kind of, the only method available to me without going the extra step of geothermal. But yeah, you could be harvesting heat from sewer channels all over the world. And so in this case, in the UK, they're doing it from abandoned coal mines. So lots of coal mining over the years. In the UK, there's more than 100 mines in Somerset and South Gloucestershire that are available to provide renewable heat. So these mines, when they're operating, they actually need a pump to pump out the water, because they're deep down and they kind of naturally fill up with water. So when they're operating as a coal mine, they have a pump to pump out the water. Well, guess what? Once you abandon it, the whole thing just fills up with water, and then you can just pump that water out, and it's a little bit warm. You go through that heat exchanger process and extract the heat, and lo and behold, you get energy from this. So it's usually comes out the water at around 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like a lot,
but it's plenty.
Then they compress it with the heat pump, and they can get it up to 60 or 70 degrees Celsius, which is very,
very hot. Yeah, I mean that could melt sidewalks and do all kinds of things. Yeah, that's it's not new technology, is it? And I love that we're, wind and solar and batteries are old technology, but they're improving. But we're just, if we need to fight the climate crisis as fast as possible, things like bricks, which you mentioned on the show, heating bricks, this is old technology, and it works, and you can do it right now. You just need to test certain methods, which way is the best of doing it, and you can go to town on it. So that's very interesting. Yes, there's all kinds of there's millions of miles of infrastructure underground that's going to be warm, and all you need is a little bit of warmth to be able to suck it out with a heat pump. You don't need hot. You don't need geothermal for it.
Yeah, no, we'd like to see more of that in cities, harvesting heat from things like the sewer system.
Well, Brian, Biden has paused natural gas LNG exports. This is from Time magazine. This is all the people I follow on Twitter in the climate world were, doing a dance, basically. This was a huge, unexpected thing. Like I said, Time magazine, the Biden administration said Friday it is delaying consideration of new natural gas export terminals in the United States, even as gas shipments to Europe and Asia have soared since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The decision aligns with the Democratic president environmentalists who fear huge increases in exports of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is locking in potentially catastrophic planet-warming emissions, when Biden has already pledged to cut those emissions by half by 2030. The Climate Defiance Twitter account was quoted by the White House website. It says, "This is monumental. This is utterly, utterly monumental. On this day, January 26, 2024, President Joseph R. Biden took a big step towards banning all new gas exports. This is the most significant move any president has ever made on stopping fossil fuels." And Asad Razzouk, on Twitter, author, clean energy author, and podcaster, the USA has just paused the approval of any new liquefied natural gas. This will hit 17 major projects which were going to fry the planet, adding more emissions than 500 coal-powered plants combined, while also poisoning us. This is a big win. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and of course, we talked about this when Russia invaded Ukraine. There was countries in Europe trying to get off Russian gas because they didn't want to support that regime. And, steps are continuing to be made, but exports of liquefied natural gas from America was one of the stopgap measures to try and get more countries off of Russia's gas, and was a great idea at the time. But the danger, of course, is locking it in, like it says, like you said there, that, oh, well, if we could just get liquefied natural gas from America and it's not too expensive, oh, okay, we'll just keep doing that. So by stopping exports, it's going to force everybody to clean energy more quickly, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so from Bloomberg, this is Catalonia, the region in Spain, is looking for a way to live without rain. So there has been terrible droughts, in many places around the world, but in Catalonia, particularly in Spain, they have had terrible droughts. They've had this is, from The Guardian here. Government officials said levels in multiple reservoirs across the region have dropped below 16%, which is a critical point. And this is following 39 consecutive months of below average rain and 2 years of record heat. So the announcement has raised concerns that Barcelona is approaching day zero, the moment when they're going to have to bring in water by tanker ships. And this reminded me of the story we talked about a few weeks ago about ice roads in Canada. To get supplies up to the far north, they often rely on ice roads, which have to be basically built out of snow and ice in the wintertime. And it's cold enough up there that this generally works. But of course, the season for that is getting shorter because of climate change. And so we're just going to have to start rethinking all of these kinds of infrastructure issues. So they're going to spend $2.6 billion in Spain to try and basically reduce their dependency on rain. Like, you so many places around the world, you just have to wait for it to rain to get the water supplies that you've needed. So, well, guess what? We can't rely on that anymore, just like we can't rely on ice roads for, long periods of the year like we used to. The Mediterranean region is warming 20% faster than the global average, and Southern Europe is suffering the worst drought conditions in at least 500 years. So they're going to work on many different things, but desalination is going to be a big part of it. So they already have 200,000 cubic meters of drinkable water every day from existing desalination projects, but they're going to keep expanding those. And desalination, of course, where you're just taking the salt out of ocean water, can give you kind of an unlimited supply, but it tends to be quite expensive to do and quite energy intensive. But when you can't rely on rain anymore, guess what? That's what you have to do.
Okay. I'm sorry you cut out there for a while, and I didn't hear it all. So,
I think we're good. We can move on.
Okay. So I was asked on Twitter what precision fermentation was, because we talked about it on the show last week or the week before. And that is, that was Tony Seba had predicted precision fermentation would become economically disruptive to dairy because they're basically making fake milk that is identical to milk, cheaper and more locally, well, with a fraction of the land. So it's the same thing that we use for cheese, yogurt, beer, and wine. And I thought I'd just have a clip of a person from one of the clean energy companies that is making precision fermentation dairy. This is Ryan Pandya, CEO and founder of Perfect Day Foods from the Plant-Based Business YouTube channel. This is a clip from him explaining in a minute and a half what precision fermentation is and how it works.
Things like cheese, yogurt, beer, wine, right? You're taking a whole food, you're adding microflora to it, some kind of fermentation process is happening, and then that entire thing is the product, right? When you add cultures to milk, let's say, and it turns into yogurt, that whole thing is the product. What we're doing in precision fermentation is we're using microflora, we're feeding them something, and then they're making a single, extremely pure product. And that is what we're actually after. So you can kind of picture our fermentation as being kind of like brewing beer, in that you've got a tank, you've got some microflora in it, they're eating some sugar or, simple plant inputs, and then they're making this kind of broth with milk protein in it. But we don't want all of that other stuff. We just want the milk protein. And so that's the precision. We take out that one protein, honestly, using the same kinds of filtration and drying that the dairy industry has already pioneered. And they work on our protein because it's the same protein. And at the end of this process, what we've actually created is an identical protein to what's found in cow's milk, but all of a sudden, for the first time in history, it's totally animal-free. There were no animals involved in making that product, and none of the other downsides of animal farming. So the sustainability, the impact on land, water, pollution, not to mention the things that are in the product that people aren't looking for: lactose, hormones, cholesterol, antibiotics, right? All these different things are not present because we're just making that protein.
So milk is basically made up of 4 things: the milk protein, the dairy protein that he's talking about, fat, sugar, which can easily be added, and water. So the key ingredient there is the protein from dairy, and they're replicating that, and then they can just add fat and sugars how they want, and water, and then you have milk. And then you can also just take the dairy protein and put it in protein supplements and things like that. That's the first thing that's going to happen. But they do have products on the on the market now, and as we said last week, there's one company in Israel that says they are now cost parity with milk. So that's a game changer, because it's only going to get better from there. It's only going to get cheaper. And, you know, they're making dairy products like milk and ice cream, but also things like deli meat, too, with precision fermentation. Now, that's not cheap. It's still, they say they're competitive with mid-tier deli meats, you know, but once that becomes a factory process, and apparently it's working quite well, and they're also making like egg whites and things like that you can buy. So this is going to continue, and it's going to become cheaper. So it's going to be identical. So you're going to say, well, why would I spend more money on the chance of getting sick? Because there's dangers to dairy and meat and animal-based products. So if these things can scale up, they could displace plant-based products like Beyond Meat too, you know, just by fermenting the proteins and the type of things that they want to replicate. And they also thinking that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what's Gen Alpha? I haven't heard of that before, but they're saying they're always coming up with new generations. When they have the spending power, it's predicted they will choose not to eat animals. I mean, if I had a choice not to eat animals, and if it was a 1-for-1, yeah, I think I would. It just seems gross to me. It's not even consciously thinking about animal welfare as much as it is, you know, I've been to a kill plant for beef, and it's just, I almost became a vegetarian that day. My daughter, who's 16, you know, she's under the influence of TikTokers, and she's wanting to eat less meat just because it's wrong and to her. And so I think she's trending in that direction. And I think a lot of her peers are.
Yeah. And it's so cool that advancements in technology aren't always about computer chips and computers and processing power and artificial intelligence, although perhaps they can use artificial intelligence to help them develop this stuff. But yeah, there can be advancements in technology that have to do with proteins and the way we eat. Okay, from Bloomberg, clean energy spending hit $1.8 trillion in 2023, which is an amazing feat. This is up 17% from the last year. And according to, this is from Bloomberg NEF, these investments include investments to install renewable energy, buy electric vehicles, build hydrogen production systems, and deploy other technologies, add in investments in building out clean energy supply chains, as well as $900 billion in financing. And the total for funding in 2023 reached about $2.8 trillion. So this is going up very, very fast. This is why, you know, the clean energy revolution is really a good news story. This is happening. This is going on. The transition is being made. And no one thought it could move this quickly, and it has moved this quickly, and, you know, but it still has to move faster. That's the only thing. An interesting footnote on the article is hydrogen investments. Speaking of hydrogen, they tripled to $10.4 billion in 2023, and that can be taken as a sign of increasing interest in the technology, though it has yet to be proven.
I think it's
scale.
a sign of increased government support for the technology, hoping that it'll go somewhere.
Yeah.
So it remains to
governments
be seen.
like to play the field and not just support one thing. So, you know, there's possibly a role for hydrogen power in the future, but that has really yet to be determined if that's going to work or not.
Brian, I believe there's a hydrogen refueling station in Palm Springs. You should go check it out. See if it...
Oh, really?
Yeah. See what it's like. See who's there. If it exploded. You know, sometimes these things can only do 10 cars a day, and then they're spent. But Clean Technica has an article on hydrogen's woes, and if you think EV charging stations are having a reliability issues, just wait till you hear about hydrogen refueling stations. They spend more time in maintenance than they do in operation, apparently, and they have a capex of 15% a year. So whatever you spend on them, you spend 15% a year maintaining them, which is a little bit high. It was quite high. California Fleet Maintenance reports showed that hydrogen fuel cell buses across 3 transit organizations at a combined 8 years of operation had maintenance costs over 50% higher than diesel buses on the average. So when you talk about the benefits of battery electric vehicles such as buses having less maintenance costs, I mean, hydrogen buses essentially are battery electric buses, but the battery is hydrogen and they're operating an electric motor. But apparently the hydrogen part is having some technical problems as well as the refueling. That's from Clean Technica. Thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, the hydrogen is really just a storage medium for the energy, and then a fuel cell converts that into electric. And so, a hydrogen car is really an electric car, but instead of a battery, it's stored in the hydrogen, which seems, perhaps unnecessarily complicated now that we know that EVs can absolutely work. Okay, from Electrek, they've got a nice article here about the list of cars that qualify for the new $4,000 used EV tax credit in the U.S. And I won't go into too much detail about this, but most of our listeners are in the U.S., so I just thought they would like to know that there is the possibility of a $4,000 tax credit on used EVs. There are a lot of caveats that, it's got to be priced under $25,000, things like that. The tax credit can only be applied once on a car. You can't resell it and somebody else get the tax credit. And then the list of eligible cars is very, very long. Like, this is basically, any electric car pretty much that's been available in the last few years is eligible for this. So if you want to look at the list, it's on Electrek, or,
has to be $25,000 or less. You have to have a $75,000 income limit for individuals, $112,500 for families, household heads of households, $150 for joint returns. But I wonder if you could sell it to your kid. You got a 20-year-old kid like I do. You just sell it to there and get another $4,000. They're probably not going to like that. But I might want to sell a car to my kid as well, right? I mean, if I had cars, I would maybe sell one to them. That's a normal thing that happens with families, right?
Yeah. So, the details are kind of long and complicated, so everyone's going to have to do their own research about how this is going to work. It's got to be from a certified dealer, for instance. So maybe that's the thing that stops you from just selling it to your kid. But if you're looking for a used EV in the US, this is great news. And then just a quick footnote here from the chairman of Toyota. This is Akio Toyoda, the CEO and chairman, who made a statement. He believes that EVs will only reach 30% market share at most, and this is despite the fact that it is, of course, over 30% already in markets like Norway and Sweden, and China, I believe, is above that. The U.S.
China's
is
pretty
headed
important to ignore, Brian. It's close by geographically. There's a lot of ties to the Chinese market, and my God, how could you ignore that fact?
Yeah, it's the largest car market in the world.
I think they've gone batty. I think they cannot handle the transition. I just think they've gone nuts. And then they're going to be in big trouble one day.
It is unfortunate.
And you know who's going to eat their lunch? It's going to be the Chinese, because they're bringing, a lot of cars onto the market, and they're going to fill that void of people who are not having it together. Tesla's going to have to even work hard to catch up to be competitive. I mean, let alone, people like GM who are coming out with crappy cars.
Yeah, no, and there was a story this week. Volkswagen was the leading car seller in China, I believe, and that they've now lost that position to BYD, was it? So
never to have it back.
It's already happening.
Never coming. It's not coming back. You know what? Speaking of heat pumps, in Sweden, I noticed that they had this sort of court, this heat pump court, to ensure consumer confidence in heat pumps in Sweden. They set up the VPN, an independent complaints board, or they like to call it the heat pump court, to protect consumers. And when did they do this, Brian? 1989. We have a swath of our listeners who weren't even born then, but
wow.
Heat pumps were a thing in 1980s, and apparently some of them were not installed well, so they came up with this complaint court. It enables consumers to bring claims against installers for poor performance or lower than expected cost and energy savings. Decisions of the court are made public, and offending installers are identified and disciplined. So apparently it was a problem with people, and that could, be a problem here too. It could be something that we might have to consider at some point as we transition to heat pumps. It has been estimated that customers win around 60% of the cases. 90% of these cases are the result of problems with installations rather than the products themselves. So only 10% of the problems are with the products. It's usually the way they install it, because it's a little bit complicated. Can be anyway. The heat pump court helped to raise consumer confidence, which was suffering in the 80s after a number of poor installations. We should have a heat pump court, electric car charger court, where people are shamed. People tried to do that with a Twitter account once, but heat pump manufacturers kept an eye on installers, and everyone was happy. From Jan Rosenau, the Energy Institute, she is a member of. She says this needs to be done now outside of Sweden, so consumer confidence isn't damaged in the current wave of heat pump installations. And as we move on with the show, we got a little bit of mail here. I was listening to the podcast this morning, and I was about to send this story to you with an admonishment that you finally mentioned us Manitobans at the end of the story, so I won't admonish you. Great work. This is from somebody in Manitoba, Canada, who noted that their hydro-rich energy grid sent power to us here in Saskatchewan, and we sent it to Alberta during the grid crisis a couple of weeks ago. And he said that articles in our local people. Keep up the good work, says Weldon. Another one says, hey, I love the show. Did Brian ever document somewhere online his heat pump setup? The model and rough description, pre-planning and dreaming about doing the same thing in Winnipeg, says Sean. We got 2 Manitoba letters this week. Wow.
Yeah. So, no, I haven't done that specifically. I mean, I've talked about a few of the details here on the show, but it's, I don't want to talk about it too much because I'm not even sure it was the right decision. So I don't want to make it sound like an endorsement or everything. My heat pump guy, by the way, is at my house right now while I'm here in Palm Springs, and he's putting in a firmware update on the heat pump right now. So, we were getting some error messages. We're not sure what that is. It's unfortunate. It's still such early adopter territory, where we are in cold climate Canada, that, be prepared to be an early adopter if you're going to put a heat pump in a cold climate place. The smart money would probably be to wait a few years for more of the details to kind of.
I think it's fine if you have a new highly insulated house. If you've gone the passive solar route and that's your heating system or something like that, that would be a good choice, and even in a very cold climate.
Yeah, retrofits are always tough, like trying to retrofit an old house to modern energy standards. It's always going to be difficult. There's always going to be problems. It's always going to be expensive. So, who knows what the right moves are exactly. But, yeah.
And, we should mention that Brian's heat pump works down to minus 22, but then an electric resistive heater furnace comes on as a backup. So that's just not very cost effective when that happens. But it's not like it turns off at minus 22.
Yeah, and it's been working generally fine, but, I really wanted to be an early adopter. I mean, I needed something to talk about on the podcast. So, it made sense.
It was a very big expense to come up with conversation topics on the podcast. Anyway, that brings us to the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
Scotland is aiming to be the world's first rewilded country. It's looking to rewild 30% of the country by 2030. That's interesting. Hoping more countries do that. Tesla's California factory is now the largest auto production factory in the United States, says Clean Technica. On January 28th, solar was meeting over 33% of the power demand in ERCOT, the Texas power grid. 33% in January. We did this. Yeah, I want to talk more about the story about Akio Toyoda, the chairman of Toyota. Many of our 5.5 million colleagues, he says, make engine parts. Let's continue to make engines. Their sounds and smells are irresistible. That is from ABC.
Yeah. Love the smell of exhaust in the morning.
What? Does that not sound cuckoo? Does it maybe lost a spring in the old noggin there? I mean, what's going on? ABC in Australia ran a story checking on the 6 people in Australia who bought hydrogen cars in 2023. And they decided to promote Toyota's love of hydrogen. And California has spent $1 billion since 2008 subsidizing refueling stations. $1 billion since 2008. 55 refueling stations are in, or refilling stations rather, are in across California. They have total fleet size in all of the U.S. of 18,000 hydrogen vehicles in the United States. That's not very high compared to EVs. It's not cheaper to fill up a fuel cell vehicle than it is with gas cars. It's about the same or worse. To get it cheaper, you need to get electricity cheap. And if that happens, what happens, Brian? Well, then everybody wants to drive EVs if electricity is cheap, right? So they're not going to catch up. EV sales are growing fast, accounting for 1 in 7 cars sold globally in 2022, up from 1 in 70 just 5 years ago. That's 1 year before our podcast started. It's hard to believe how far we've come. We imagine these amazing things, and they're happening. They're happening. Sometimes ahead of schedule.
Wild ride.
Sodium ion, 100 megawatt hour battery factory is going to be built in China's Hubei province in 2024. That's this year, in case you haven't checked your calendar. So sodium ion is taking off. China has added 216.9 gigawatts of solar last year, blowing away its previous record of 87 from 2022. China installed more solar in 2023 than the U.S. has in its history, just last year.
Wow.
From 2018 to 2023, silver use in solar PV cells has dropped around a half. That's good. That's one reason why prices keep going down. This is a CS fast fact. 25% of the world's CO2 is from industrial heating. And bricks might work out interesting for that. If you heat up the bricks with electricity from renewables, they have round-the-clock heat for industrial heating. 25% of the CO2 is from not industrial operations, but the heating involved in industrial operations, like steel, for example, and processing of things. Last year, New Jersey suffered the cancellation of 2.2 gigawatts of offshore wind projects. This week, the Public Utility Board approved 2 new projects totaling 3.7. So the U.S. offshore wind industry is roaring back, Brian. Another CS fast fact. Last year, we deployed 44% of all the solar that was deployed in the history of solar. 40 years solar has existed. And last year,
wow,
44% of it went up. That's the mind-blowing. 356,000 heat pumps were installed in Germany last year. Germany has twice the population of Canada and a fourth, I guess, of the U.S. population. So Brazil's rooftop or distributed solar is up 30% in the last year. A lot of rooftop solar stories going around. In the next 5 years, the world will add more renewables than it has been installed in total in the previous 100 years, according to the IEA. In the next 5 years, it's mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. My mind blown. And finally this week, from the China EV Post, the world's largest battery makers, CATL and BYD, are reportedly pushing battery costs down even further. To secure it's market position, CATL is sorting out production line resources and pushing for cost reductions. Several automakers in China will switch to the CATL square cell LFP batteries in mid-2024. That's this summer, at a price not exceeding half what they sell for now. And keep in mind, they dropped by half last year. It's stupid. It's just... maybe this is why Toyota went insane, because, half mid-century, no, mid-decade, no, mid this year, Brian. Do you know what that means? I mean, it has huge implications for the deployment of renewables and the killing of fossil fuels. It can be hard to extrapolate the relationship between falling battery prices and what it does to the future of oil, but you got to use your imaginations. EVs could drop by $3,000 again this year, just on the cost of batteries going down. The lower battery prices are cheaper, mean cheaper EVs, and that speeds up the date that all EVs will have sticker prices lower than gas counterparts. And for storing renewable energy, the price of renewables as a total solution goes down and wipes out the fossil fuel competition. Leap Motors CEO, who is buying these batteries, even believes the price will drop a lot further. Even by another third. They'll be sold to EV manufacturers for $55 a kilowatt hour this year. And Tony Seba, 10 years ago, and he was called insane, and still is by some people, predicted it would be $50 per kilowatt hour by 2027. And we're talking 2024. That's insane.
We're already there. That's amazing.
What will they be in 2030 if this incredible, technological improvements keep happening and the cost curve savings keep happening? I mean, it's incredible what we can't predict because it's exceeding predictions all the time. But nothing will come close to competing with wind, solar, and batteries. Nothing. And, building nuclear now seems foolish because batteries, if they're cheap enough, can fill all voids necessary. And who knows what improvements will happen and cost reductions. People think that hydrogen, which is just an expensive battery, is suddenly going to rise from the ashes. No, it's not. Over the past 30 years, battery costs are down by 99%. Okay? The density of top-tier cells is up 5 times, and sales are up 30% each year. Combined impact means that 50% of fossil fuels will be wiped out by batteries alone by 2040. And I think it'll be worse. I think it's whatever you predict worse for fossil fuels. That's our show.
Yeah, that's our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And around social media, you can find us as Clean Energy Pod.
Check out our YouTube channel and TikTok for special features. Probably doing some more videos this week, some commentaries, some setting straight of facts. Have a look at the store that we have for clean energy merch. The link is right there in your show notes. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast app because we do this every week. And it's been 4 years, Brian. You're in Palm Springs, and I'm still where I was 4 years ago. But it's okay. The world has moved on. And it's been amazing. We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Happy anniversary. And I will be back home next week.
The Clean Energy Show.